G'day. This is a video that's going to be going into depth about the motion graphics default project for Unreal, or MGDP, as I have so eloquently coined it, and to talk a little bit more about why I've done certain things and, why I created the whole project in the first place. I think the answer to that is pretty self-explanatory if you've ever used Unreal, but if you haven't, there's some friction involved when you start a new project. Because of games design and the way that they spend, years in just one project environment, they'll spend all of that time, tweaking that environment to perfection. Whereas for us in motion design, we just create a new project like 3 times a day, 8 times a day, whatever it is. So the expectations are very, very different. And when I came into it from a motion graphics standpoint, I made a list of things that just annoyed me about starting a new project. And slowly I've been addressing each one of them. And when I was thinking about starting this channel, I tried to see whether I could put all of these things into a template project that was lightweight enough for me to be able to distribute to everybody. Let's jump into the project and take a look at it, and we'll talk about it from there. We'll start off with installation, go through how I built the project, and then we'll end with a quick demonstration. Okay, so when you download the file, you'll have a zip, and unzipped, it's just got a folder and a README. Inside the README, you'll find a link to my Notion page about the project, and it's just over here. You can see I've just sort of included a installation, the full list of what I've actually done to the project to build it, and kind of a few thoughts about why, an up-to-date download link, and there's going to be an FAQ, which hopefully I'll update as I get more questions from you guys. When you unzip it, you need to copy this folder, the FC_MGDP or MGDP. So all you need to do is copy the folder into Program Files, Epic Games, the Unreal Engine version, and then Templates. As you can see, I put it here, and then that allows it to pop up in the Film, Video, and Live Events section right next to blank. Ray tracing is just on. We're not going to be dealing with non-dynamic lighting or lighting that you have to bake. For this one, I don't need the starter content, and I'm just going to call it Demo 01. So I wanted this template to be fairly lightweight so I could give it away to everybody, and also so that it just wouldn't take forever to start up. Once you start enabling a lot of plugins and you start getting a lot of stuff in your project, it just starts taking a very long time to load, and I wanted to avoid that with this. Anything about getting into Unreal that causes friction, I wanted to try and remove. And we're in. Now, the one thing that I haven't been able to get rid of is just this little asset editor was open. Basically, it's referring to the sequencer, but as you'll see later, I've already set it to open automatically. I'll look into how to remove that a little bit later, but for the moment, it's still there. You'll notice that it starts up pretty much like After Effects. We have a level ready to go, and we also have a sequencer. So just like in After Effects, how every comp has a timeline associated with it, in Unreal, that's not necessarily the case. You can actually have levels with multiple sequences, and sequences can actually spawn things that aren't in the level. You can see that this camera here belongs or is set to spawnable because of that little lightning there. It's set to spawn when this sequence is open. So it's actually quite important to have the sequence open with the level so you can see things as you intended. And you can see that we've got the animation there in the little preview window, and if I want, I can just lock the viewport to that camera and it shows me what that camera is looking at. So that's how it's installed, and that's how you open up a new project, and that's created its own project in the MGDP Demo 1 folder inside your Unreal folder. And from here, you can basically do whatever you want to it. Inside the content drawer, I've set it up pretty much like After Effects. So you can see that I've basically included a comps folder, and this is how I would set up my After Effects projects. The one thing that is a little bit different is that things need to be associated with the comp that you wouldn't expect. So as I said, the timeline is a separate object to the level, as opposed to After Effects where they are just a one thing. Materials, I've included some very, very basic materials. I've used them for debugging certain things. When you get in really bad UVs, you want to just be able to see what's wrong very quickly. And I've also included an example Niagara project. If you double click on that, you can see it inside the Niagara system. And if you've never used Niagara, this was actually a huge reason for me moving over to Unreal Engine. It's kind of like Particular meets X-Particles, except it's in real time. It's insane. They've developed their real-time volumetric simulations inside Niagara, so it is that powerful. For the moment, I'll just close that down. Let's talk more about what I've included. We'll go down the list. So inside here, I've included OCIO configs. Now, if you want to see how I set this up, William Foucher has a really good video on it. Basically, I found that if I included the OCIO config in this folder, like this, it would actually be able to reference it internally inside the OCIO config object. As you can see, it hasn't got sort of like an absolute path, it's got a relative path. So now it will just work without you having to set it up from scratch. So down here in the resources folder, there is a default sort of studio which I've included. You can see that that relates to this. And if I just duck out of this camera, you can see that it's just a simple cyc. And you can put objects on there. You can set up very simple sort of lighting. I've got kind of an approximation of a studio setup, but it's actually quite hacky if I'm honest. It's not the best studio setup. That's for future episodes. All right, so we've got that included. Another thing people don't know is that Unreal doesn't actually access the system fonts in a way that you would expect. So you actually have to import whatever fonts you want to use. So I've included a few, like Poppins, just some standard fonts, some more interesting looking fonts like Ostrich, and some funky fonts like Climate Crisis. These are all open source fonts. Again, if you go back to the Notion page, you can see a full list, and you can also see links to where I got them from. The last thing is that I've included some HDRs. There are lots of ways to use HDRs inside Unreal, which I'll dive into in future tutorials. So that's kind of what I've included, and feel free to explore and ask questions in the comments. One thing I really wanted to just show you was behind the scenes, there's quite a lot of stuff that I've done to set it up. Like all of the different plugins. As you can see on the Notion page, there's a lot of plugins that I've enabled from scratch. This takes like an hour, so I've certainly enjoyed not having to do it every time I want to start a new project. Even things that you might not expect, like the ability to create text in 3D, is a plugin that you need to enable. It's actually still in beta. Beta? Beta. I don't know. But there's a lot that I've enabled. So let's go to editor preferences. There's just a few things here which I've set up to make it feel more like a normal DCC. So we have invert middle mouse pan is turned on, orbit around selection, and just for quality of life, I've turned on use less CPU when in background, because I was finding that when I was trying to do something else besides Unreal, it was still making the graphics card go into hyperdrive. Ticking that means that you can just click out of Unreal and it will stop making your office into a furnace. One thing that I'm a little bit proud of is this editor blueprints, which I've created, editor utility blueprint, startup with sequence, and you can see the extent of my coding prowess. Yeah, it's really just one node, one prints, yes, I've run. The next one is basically just saying, open this level sequence. And you can choose whatever level sequence you want. But what I've done is I've included this blueprint in the startup docs of this project, so it will always open whatever level sequence is chosen in here. Obviously, if you don't want it, you can choose none, and then it won't start up anything, but I'm going to keep it as the level sequence that I want. Don't forget to compile and then save the asset. Okay, so here we are in the studio. You can see that we've basically got a very, very simple scene with a very simple bit of camera animation. Just to show you how things are customizable. Yep, this text 3D. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the playback to loop, and I'm going to just start playing it through, and I'm going to select my camera, pin that there, so that now I can see the playback in real time. I can also move around my scene, and I'm going to start editing. Let's pretend that we're doing a product demonstration about the new thing on the block. It's called a cube. Let's say we're going to create a cube. It's not quite right, so I'm going to just up the kerning a little bit. Maybe. All right, so that's kind of funky. I'm not feeling the font. Okay, so I might just change it over to, yeah, it's, I mean, that's a little bit 1990s. That's better. All right, so that feels more cubish to me. I'm gonna just really quickly bring in a cube because that's what we are dealing with. For some reason it brings it in at that. I'm not quite sure why. Let's zero that out, put it behind the text. You can see that we're just moving stuff while we're operating, so you know that's always a bit fun. Let's make it completely encompass the text like that. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now, let's say that at this point we want to render out. All I'm going to do is hit render, and from there you'll see that the name of the comp ends with a V. That's just because I prefer to version up inside the render queue for a few different reasons. If we load a preset like Full HD EXR, it now defaults to job name. So whatever you type in there will become the file name of the render. I've also set it to render into a renders folder inside your project directory, which is just something that I like. The default is a couple of folders deep, which is just slightly annoying to me. Inside here though is the real secret sauce, where I've already got all of the console variables set up. The color output is already set as you would want. The anti-aliasing is already set. Pretty much all of my settings came from Will Foucher again, so definitely check out all of his videos if you want to understand what's going on here. Now that I'm looking at it though, I'm realizing that in DaVinci Resolve, I might actually want to separate the foreground from the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of my Stencil Layers presets. Yeah, just the ProRes 444 should be enough for what I'm looking at. And Stencil Layers is basically going to look at these actor layers. You can actually see they're up here in the editor. So if I have a look at the layers, turn that on and off, I can see I've already got my letters in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the cube, right click, add selected actors to selected layers. And now when I turn that on and off, you'll see that. And when I render it, you'll actually find that you get different layers with alpha channels for the foreground. So let's go back into the render layer, and now all I need to do is hit render. That's basically it. And that's the project. It's pretty simple, but I think you'll agree there's a lot of stuff in there that will make our lives a lot easier. Please, if you have any questions about the project, leave them in the comments. Mostly though, I just hope you enjoy the project and create great stuff with it.